Well, hi everybody. I'm Tim Anderson. I'm the Group Head of Transport at the Energy Saving Trust, and I've been asked today to talk a little bit about driver behaviour or eco-driving in relation to our theme, which of course is electric vehicles, and particularly as we reflect on where fleets are going in terms of their electrification, increased e-mobility. So let's get going. I've entitled today Driving Better Range. I guess the pun is not lost on you. And as we just think about eco-driving, one of the things that I guess I have to sort of declare really is that this is not the most exciting subject. One of the things we've been working with driver behaviour and eco-driving for about 15 years, and it can be a bit dull. It's not the sexiest part of e-mobility, and it can be, well, just a little bit boring. We've tried calling it different things. We've called it eco-driving, we've called it smarter driving, we called it fuel-efficient driving, and now we're back on eco-driving. But one of the reasons that the message of eco-driving doesn't quite resonate with people is, of course, they think that they are perfect drivers. I'm a great driver. And there's Peter Perfect there from the Wacky Races, who I'm sure some of you will recognise. I'm a great driver. I don't need anyone telling me how to drive. And so there's really the first challenge that we need to kind of consider as we think about driver behaviour and how to get the most out of our vehicles and our drivers. One of the other challenges, of course, is understanding what the performance of a vehicle may be. The driver is hugely important, and when you buy your vehicles or choose your vehicles, you'll see headline figures quoted as MPG, different drive cycles, the NEDC or the WLTP now. All of these cause a bit of confusion and perhaps set the expectation really high. So let's have a think about it. Let's talk about what's going on with efficient driving. So there's a triple benefit, if you like. None of this will be new to you, I'm sure, but let's just think about it for a second. So you've got emissions reduction, of course, that's why we exist at the Energy Saving Trust. And that's both CO2 emissions, but of course, air quality emissions as well. You've got cost savings. Clearly, if you're using less fuel, you're going to save money, and potentially also through maintenance as well. Driver behaviour has an impact on maintenance for sure. And finally, fewer collisions is really important, particularly with duty of care that employers have to think about safety of drivers. We've been, as I say, working at this for a long time. We've actually subsidised training for almost 90,000 fleet drivers and trained more than 1,000 approved driving instructors, ADIs. And so, you know, we're really making a dent in upskilling both the industry and the drivers to adopt cleaner ways of driving their vehicles. Those benefits of emissions reduction, cost savings, fewer collisions apply to both ICE vehicles, petrol and diesel vehicles, but also for EVs. But crucially, and I suppose the important thing for today, is to think about the extra benefit of range extension. We've all heard of range anxiety, and one of the reasons that people think they can't have an EV. Well, driving will extend the range, and we'll be looking at that a little bit more in a second. So just coming back to petrol and diesel vehicles, what are the key things that we would advocate? Well, first of all, anticipation, reading the road ahead, making sure you don't brake or have to accelerate unnecessarily using more fuel. Maximize engine braking, so you know you're taking your foot off the accelerator early, shifting through the gears quickly, not hanging around in those lower gears, and finally speed. Of course, the faster you go, the more fuel you use. These are similar, of course, for EVs, but there are some key differences. The first of which, of course, you'll notice there are gears is crossed out, and apart from, I think, the Porsche Taycan, which has apparently 2 gears and it manages those itself, but most electric vehicles don't have gears. They don't need them. The other difference is, instead of the engine braking from a petrol diesel vehicle, the key thing is to maximize the regenerative braking. And regenerative braking, if you've ever driven an EV, is a fantastic thing of being able to use the electric motor not just for propulsion, but actually to charge the batteries. How does it work? Well, basically, an electric motor and a generator are the same thing. So when you need to get going, you're going to put your foot down and you're going to use the battery power to accelerate through the motor. Well, if you capture that momentum rather than just lose it through heat in the brakes, then you can use that to charge your batteries, and that's a really fantastic way of bringing down the amount of energy you need to drive your vehicle. It's a fantastic addition, if you like, to electric vehicles. A key thing is that depending on which vehicle you're driving, you can actually change the settings, and so you can have a really hard regen or a really light regen. And again, if you've ever driven an electric vehicle and you've got hard regen, then actually you hardly need to use the brakes, because that regen is doing the job of both stopping the vehicle but also charging the battery. So make use of it. Okay, so let's think about speed. And this is a graph here that is looking at petrol and diesel vehicles, ICE vehicles. And one of the things that really is important to note from this graph is not the number of lines, the different color lines. You don't need to worry about those. They're just different kinds of car, some petrol, some diesel, some automatic, some manual. So you don't need to worry about the different lines. What I'm trying to point out here is the shape. And along the bottom axis, you've got the speed. And what you can see is that for a petrol or diesel vehicle, it doesn't matter what kind of vehicle, the most efficient speed is between 40 and 50 miles per hour. So it takes a lot of energy to get the vehicle going. And as you work through the gears, that's quite inefficient. And at the tail end, you've got the effect of air resistance, of drag. So that's why you have this shaped curve for a petrol diesel vehicle. Conversely, if you look at an electric vehicle, then it's more of a straight line, really. The important thing here is that actually with an electric vehicle, the faster you go, the more energy you use. There is no getting away from that. It is purely the laws of physics, and I can't do much about that. But yeah, just to remind you that, with an electric vehicle, you have this straight line relationship between speed and energy consumption, and with an ICE vehicle, a petrol diesel, you have this U-shaped. So there is no question that with an electric vehicle, the faster you go, fortunately, the more energy you're going to use, and the quicker you will deplete your battery. Just looking at it from a different perspective, if you like, with a petrol and diesel vehicle, if you compare the speeds, which are on the left of this slide, the 70 miles an hour versus 50 miles an hour, and so on, you can see that with a petrol and diesel vehicle that there is a small compromise in terms of how much fuel you're using, but with an electric vehicle, then that is a lot greater. And this is, by the way, from research that we've done in actual vehicles on a test track. So there is definitely a reason that you should not be driving your electric vehicles mega fast. And one way to control that, of course, is through speed limiters in a fleet environment. Having said all of that, it's not all bad news for those of you who want to be running around in your electric vehicles at high speed, because one of the things that doesn't have the same effect on energy consumption is acceleration. And you can see this stat here, which is comparing sort of medium versus gentle acceleration or maximum versus gentle acceleration. Again, there is a compromise in terms of how much energy is consumed. But if we just flick on here and compare that to a petrol and diesel vehicle, then you can see with an electric vehicle, actually the acceleration has a much less effect. So speed has a higher effect on energy consumption with an electric vehicle, but acceleration has a lower effect. And what you do with that information, well, that's up to you. But basically, it does mean you can nip around in your electric vehicle, which we all know they're great for, without a massive detriment to your energy consumption. Just thinking a little bit about heating and air conditioning, this is another area where it's important just to think about how we use our vehicles. And of course, we live in a country where we have extremes of warm weather, we hope, when the summer comes, and quite cold weather. And it's um, it's important that we understand that when it's cold, the vehicle will use more energy, particularly if we're using our car's heating. So um, the heating does have a big effect on EV range. There's no question about it. Um, Approximately, these are some of our estimates. In the summer, you'll get about 4.5 miles per kilowatt, and that will fall during the winter to 3 miles per kilowatt. That's because you're warming the car, you're using more of the ancillaries, the lights, the wipers, and so on. So there is a compromise, and here in the UK, we do need to think about that. There's no question. So one of the things that's important when you have your EV is to think about when to heat it and how to heat it. Now, one of the reasons that this is an issue for EVs is that when you think about a petrol and diesel vehicle, of course, they have a load of waste heat, and that's a great thing to use just to keep the cabin nice and toasty and warm. But with an EV, you don't have all of that waste heat, so you have to generate that heat. And if you're using the batteries to generate that heat and keep the cabin at a nice ambient temperature, then that's using extra energy. So it's one thing that you can do, of course, is preheat your vehicle. So when it's plugged in at home on that frosty morning, make sure that you've set your little app up to tell the vehicle that it should be a balmy 20 degrees by 8 o'clock, perhaps, when you need to leave for work or to take the kids to school. And then you're not having to take the car from probably 0 up to 20 degrees using the power that's contained within the batteries. You're using it from the mains power that's coming through the EV charger. So do think about preheating, and the same with cooling as well. Of course, if it's a really hot day, get the vehicle nice and cool while it's plugged in. One of the ways to keep it nice and toasty without having the heating cranked up really high is to keep the seats and the steering wheel warm. It's a little bit like sitting next to the heater. If you can keep yourself warm by keeping the seats and the steering wheel warm, that actually uses less energy than heating the whole of the interior of the vehicle. So do have a think about using those. You might think that they're actually using more energy, but they don't. They use less. And finally, as I've already said, use your app, keep the vehicle nice and warm or cool while it's plugged in. Those are really useful tips about how to maximize the energy that's contained within the battery and keeping the car either nice and warm on a winter's day or nice and cool on a summer's day. Hopefully we'll have some of those coming soon. So really just to finish off, what is it you as a fleet operator can do? Should you be doing anything? Should it matter? Well, for us, it is really important still to focus on the driver. I know it may not be that fashionable, it may be a bit dull, and everyone thinks they're a great driver, as I said at the beginning. But we really feel that there is an important part of training drivers, particularly those who are not used to driving EVs on a regular basis, showing them how to use those vehicles, making them completely familiar with them, taking them through the controls of the vehicle and also the specific techniques around setting the regen to maximize those vehicles. So do invest in on-road EV training, and stress on-road is nothing better than actually being behind the vehicle, having a play with the controls and going out, if possible, with an instructor to really get the best out of that vehicle. All these vehicles are different. They have different settings in different modes, and they have different functions that are almost endless in their different configurations. So please do understand and encourage your drivers to understand the specifics around each model. Some will do something that will really help with range maximization, and other vehicles may not have that feature. So do understand the model specifics. And finally, think about how the vehicle is going to be used. An EV, believe it or not, is not always the right option. For a driver who's doing 100,000 miles a year or 50,000 miles a year, perhaps more realistically, on the motorway all the time, it's going to be a stretch to use a pure EV, even with some of the fantastic EVs that are available at this time. So do think about the EV, the specific type of vehicle, and how it will operate, particularly the speed. Motorway driving does drain an electric vehicle's battery and obviously have an impact on its range. There's no way of getting away from those physics. Now, of course, EVs are improving. The battery technology is moving at a pace. So there's no question, of course, that EVs will be and are our future. But do think about the specific vehicle and how it's going to be used when you're thinking about EVs. So that's everything from me. Thanks for listening. And I'll be joining the panel discussion shortly. So I look forward to your questions. Thanks for having me, and we'll see you soon. Thanks. Bye.
Hi, and welcome to everyone attending this breakout session at the Fleet News EV Conference 2021. My name is Richard Parker, and I work for Webfleet Solutions, leading on our EV approach to market in the UK. Today, I'm hopefully going to be sharing some valuable insights in terms of policy, planning, and data-led driver coaching to help you maximize the available range of your EVs as they operate throughout the year. In the next 15 minutes, I hope that we will look at preparing your drivers for their first electric vehicle. So we'll look at habits of when they're established and how they're hard to change. If those habits in terms of electric vehicles are detrimental to the range of the vehicle, then the impact financially and operationally on your business can be more longer term than you would like. So we're going to look at some of the areas of education that you can undertake before the driver gets behind the wheel of their first EV. Next, we'll look at setting up the vehicle for the day ahead. Like internal combustion engine vehicles, an EV will use the available fuel or energy to power auxiliary systems like heating and air conditioning. Unlike diesel or petrol, where the ignition has to be on, an EV can be preconditioned. So we'll look at some of the best practices around how this is done in order to maximize the driving range. Next, we're going to look at using data to manage driver behavior. The behavior of the right foot in an EV can have a huge impact on actual driving range. So we'll look at how the data can help first to understand and then, if needed, manage a change in driver performance. Next, we'll look at better journey planning. It's inevitable that not all journeys or working days will be completed without the need for top-up charging. However, with the visibility of journey data combined with full visibility of charging infrastructure, planning can mitigate the level of impact that might otherwise be felt. Finally, we'll have a quick look at planning for seasonality. There is no doubt that the impact of temperature and seasonality on an EV's range can be significant. So we'll look briefly at how businesses can plan and effectively implement operational change to take account for loss of range. Okay, preparing your drivers for their first EV. As mentioned in the introduction, for many drivers, the last time they received any driving instruction was in the lead up to taking their driving test. However, ahead of them getting in their first EV, is very worthwhile investing in either driver coaching or driver handbooks that specifically address the factors that can either have a positive or negative impact on range. So some of these are regenerative braking. EVs will allow you to set the level of regenerative braking. Some simply are on or off, while others allow you to set the level of braking across multiple settings. Understanding the journey you're about to undertake, i.e. if your journey will be predominantly on a motorway or predominantly in an urban area, and switching to the different levels of braking will have positive impact on the range. As an analogy, for those who remember dynamo bike lights, and I'm old enough to remember them, and how much harder it was to pedal when the dynamo was engaged, the impact is not so dissimilar as with regenerative braking. Therefore, on roads where much of the journey will be at a constant speed, the energy required to run the vehicle is not necessarily offset by increasing range through regenerative braking. The opposite is true of urban driving, where lots of stop-start can have a positive effect on the range due to the amount of regen braking. Therefore, driver education piece is to get them to think about the journey ahead and switch the levels of regen braking accordingly. It's also worth pointing out that at sometimes the strongest levels of regen braking can feel quite uncomfortable for the individual, and they may have to be a compromise between the range and driver well-being. Next is driving mode. Now, anyone who's driven an EV will tell you that it can be exciting to drive. The torque when accelerating away is instant. However, planting the foot to the floor will have a significant impact on the range available. EVs all have eco mode or equivalent terminology, and when these are engaged, the limit of acceleration in the vehicle is available and therefore reducing the energy consumption. Renault have found that in their EVs, eco mode can improve the range by about 10%. Next is cruise control and speed. Let's look at speed first. Most people, rightly or wrongly, think that by driving at the speed limit or above it in some cases will get you to your destination that much quicker. In actual fact, the difference in time for a 30-mile journey at 60 miles an hour versus 70 miles an hour is only 4 minutes. However, the impact on energy consumption, according to the Department of Energy, is about 14% in those same ranges of miles per hour. So you can see that by educating drivers, you can have the impact of improving the vehicle range by managing the misconception about impact of time. The chances are it will also have a positive impact on their mental health, as they are likely to be driving in a calmer way. On cruise control, by its very nature, is designed to keep you at a constant speed, regardless of topography. This removes the ability to manage the throttle when going up hills and has a detrimental effect on the range. Encouraging your drivers to reduce the speed when going up hills will manage the energy consumption and improve the overall range of the vehicle. Heating the cabin and cooling the cabin. We're going to talk about this in more detail on the next slide, so I'll just move on to the impact of load. If you're like me, my car used to be full all the time. Needless things in the boot, children's things in the back of the car. The additional weight has always had an impact on the efficiency of the vehicles we drive. But with an EV, the focus is there on range much more significantly, and these little things are being brought more and more to our consciousness. Educating drivers to remove unnecessary weight, and for that matter, things like roof bars and other accessories that add drag when not needed, will help prevent range erosion. Finally, on this slide, tyres. Data suggests that about 25% of the vehicles on our roads have improperly inflated tyres. And figures show that for every 1 psi drop in pressure from the correct vehicle position, there is a 0.3% drop in economy or range. EVs are also generally heavier than their equivalent internal combustion engine vehicles, so the impact of underinflation increasing rolling resistance is more pronounced. And that's not to mention the increased risk to the safe operation of the tyre and the long-term impact to the life of the tyre. So ensuring that your tyres are correctly inflated is a key factor in efficient and safe driving. Getting the maximum range available for the next day's workload. Okay, so moving on to how do we set the vehicles up? As we said before, unlike petrol and diesel vehicles, EVs have the ability to be preconditioned remotely, and doing so will have operational and financial benefits. It also has driver benefit. So twice this year, I've even in lockdown, I've been sat in my wife's car, which is a diesel, for 10 minutes, freezing while I wait for the windscreen to defrost, not wanting to leave the vehicle unattended as I wouldn't want it stolen. I would much rather be able to be sat having my cup of coffee in the morning and then just get in the car and go. So how best do you precondition a vehicle to protect the available range? Well, firstly, understanding if the vehicle can be kept in more temperature regulated conditions, such as a garage when not in use, will limit the amount of energy required to prepare the vehicle for the next day, whether that is heating or cooling the vehicle. And where home or depot charging is available, we know that defrosting the vehicle in winter, preheating the occupant seats and the steering wheel and not the cabin while still on the charger will assist the available range for the day versus not doing so. Some figures suggest that the impact of heating the cabin over the seats and the steering wheel for vehicles without heat pumps can be 3,000 watts versus 300 watts. And now many EVs do now come with or have the option for heat pumps, which are vastly more efficient. But even so, adopting an education program aimed at coaching drivers of this impact will deliver range benefit. Also, by timing the charging cycle to finish just before the vehicle is needed, will ensure the batteries are preconditioned and will therefore not unnecessarily erode range availability, getting the batteries to the right temperature via heating or cooling requirements. As a side note, with more comfortable outside temperature ranges and driving speeds below 45 miles per hour, encouraging drivers to wind the window down, a bit old school I know, and turn off the air conditioning will have range improvements while still keeping the occupants comfortable. For fleet stakeholders, capability now exists to have a holistic view of when the fleet is charging or not at defined times of the day. For example, ensuring that all EVs are on charge by 9 p.m. to ensure next day readiness. This can be used to ensure that the EV fleet will be in the best possible state of charge for when the vehicle is required. Vehicles can also notify when connected but not charging. Knowing this data can help see that the battery temperature is being maintained for the start of the day and potentially prolonging the life of the battery by protecting it from extreme conditions. It can also be an indication of a failed charge, which through early awareness can be managed to limit the impact on any due requirement for that vehicle. Of course, the same data source can also be used when on-site charging infrastructure is limited and can be used to efficiently notify when a vehicle is charged and can be moved off the charge point, therefore allowing more vehicles to be charged throughout the day. Okay, so moving on to how we manage driver behavior with data. I want to quickly look at 3 areas about driver behavior where we can give insight and improvement opportunities. So firstly, telematics data in EVs will provide driving performance visibility as it always has for internal combustion engines. Understanding how journeys have been undertaken, then coaching a driver on things like acceleration, coasting to junctions, driving at a speed that's below the actual speed limit for the road will all limit the loss of range and therefore the impact on the business. Secondly, reporting now exists for EVs which shows by driver what the energy consumption is for the vehicle they are driving over the charging cycles, so enabling fleets to measure the miles per kilowatt hour in the way that we have historically measured MPG. This will provide clarity for fleets to understand an individual's impact on range achieved for the vehicle and on potential costs for the business. Finally, the third part of data will also show when and where the vehicle was charged and what is the prevailing rate at the charge point. In some ways, this is very similar to the understanding that we use of a traditional fuel card. Is the driver filling up at premium sites or the equivalent of supermarkets? Of course, there's also the added complication with EVs about the time of day the vehicle is being charged, having an impact on either cost or operational efficiency. Having visibility of these patterns on a driver-by-driver basis will enable businesses to manage the conversations with factual information to effect change in the driver behavior. So now we're going to look at a little bit about journey charging. So we believe that potentially 40 to 60% of electric LCVs in particular may not have regular access to home or depot charging. So ensuring drivers are able to access suitable charging infrastructure ahead of the next day's requirements is key. Combining journey data with dynamic charge point information to include availability, price, number of working charge points and pin types information will enable drivers and fleet managers to efficiently plan and navigate the working day to ensure vehicles are charged for the next day. By planning charging for lunch breaks or admin locations, just as an example, minimizing job loss opportunities. The availability of this data minimizes business and driver disruption, perhaps even making EVs an option where they were previously discounted due to on-street charging challenges. Next, planning for seasonality. Analysis suggests that when the outside temperature is between 10 and 0 degrees, the range of an EV can be impacted by 0 to 20%, and between 0 and minus 10 degrees by 20 to 40%. It's coincidence maybe, but it's also true that the best performance is achieved when outside temperatures are between 20 and 22 degrees, which is the same temperature we like to keep our houses and where we are less likely to use heating or air conditioning to be comfortable. For years, data has been available relating to the average trip distances and vehicle operating patterns. As we learn more and more about the impact of seasonality on EV range, it is now worth looking at that same data to understand if a seasonal change in daily operating is needed. For example, when an EV winter performance data is integrated into seasonally adjustable operational planning, jobs can be automatically planned to take account of this impacted range and any potential top-up charges needed during the day. If you have telematics data and associated reporting, take time to understand the daily trip dynamics for the business and ask, can the summer model be sustained through the winter if we are going to be impacted by seasonal range challenges? Or, through using the available data, can early planning mitigate the business impact of this? Route optimization tools will also feed routes to drivers and maximize an EV's seasonally adjusted range and prevent drivers eroding potential mileage by not taking the most efficient route. It will also ensure that where top-ups are required, these are specifically planned into the journeys. Thank you for listening, and I hope that some of this has been useful to help your policies and fleet management achieve the best available range from your electric vehicles.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this live Q&A discussion for the session on improving range via an efficient driving policy. This is your chance to put questions to our session speakers. And joining me on the panel are Tim Anderson from Energy Saving Trust and Richard Parker from our sponsors, Webfleet Solutions. Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Good afternoon.
Hi, Stephen.
Okay, Tim, if I start with you, so we're used to seeing figures on the improvements that efficient driving can make to diesel and fuel, diesel and petrol fuel consumption, and typically, I guess, around 10 to 15%. How much difference to real-world electric range can efficient driving have?
Well, I guess what I was describing in the presentation was the fact that actually the savings are going to be considerably bigger, and as a percentage, if you like, of the range of the vehicle on a full charge versus a full tank, it's going to be a bigger difference, and that's why eco driving or efficient driving makes so much more sense when you're in an EV, because you can visibly see your range extend if you adopt those techniques for eco driving. So, you know, the 10 to 15% is really a sort of baseline, going from a baseline of a sort of normal drive in a petrol or diesel vehicle to adopting all the eco driving techniques of anticipation and changing through the gears in a swift way. With an electric vehicle, obviously not all of those factors are there. The gears, of course, don't exist, but you'd be looking at near a 20% improvement from a sort of really kind of normal drive of just kind of rattling around and not using regen very well to adopting the eco driving techniques for an EV. So it's going to be in excess of 20% for sure, maybe more.
Okay. And so, Richard, in terms of the Webfleet data, what does that show when it comes to real world electric range versus stated range, and what are you seeing as having the biggest impact on range? Is it the drive-in? Is it the use of equipment like heaters, or is it just the sort of external weather?
Well, at certain times of years, Stephen, it's all three, you know, and seasonality does play a part, but most of the organizations, the corporate organizations that we would talk to would typically say that the driver has the greatest impact on the available range of that vehicle on any given day. And to reiterate what Tim said around the coasting and the regen capabilities of the vehicles and using that appropriately, you know, has a huge impact on the range, as does the way that a vehicle is accelerated and the fuel usage. You know, and we can track, you know, the fuel usage within the vehicles, the energy usage, if you like, on a single journey, which then gives you the opportunity to talk to the driver in a positive and constructive way and help them understand what actually impact they're having on the usability and the range of that vehicle.
So got a question that's come in that I really hope it is from the Liam Gallagher. But the Oasis singer would like to know, are there any statistics on how the load of the vehicle impacts the range? So I'll come to you first, Richard. Do you have any stats from a Webfleet point of view?
We don't, and actually, funnily enough, after yesterday's session, it was something I've put through to our development team. And the one thing about Webfleet is we take a lot of feedback from customers, and as you and I discussed before, that this is a really quick and developing area of the automotive industry across the whole of transport. So, no, we don't at the moment, but I am aware of a few other organisations that are starting to look at the impact of load specifically around commercial vehicles and how that degrades the range and by what percentages.
Tim, is it some of the energy saving trusts has looked at?
Yeah, I haven't got any data to hand, but we have been looking at this. Particularly, of course, this is pertinent to vans really more so than cars. And it's fair to say that what we know is that there is a trade-off, just like there is with a diesel van. If you stack it full of bags of cement, you are going to use more fuel. There's no question about that. But we haven't got the data at the moment. We do know people who are looking at this both in terms of on-road trials and also perhaps more helpfully in terms of kind of on in a test environment. So when we get that, we'll be happy to share it. I was hoping to put it into this presentation, but the data's not quite ready. But as Richard said, there's a number of organisations looking at it.
Okay, I was just staying with you, Tim. There's a question that's come in around recommending any EV driver trainings that somebody could approach. There's some that are very interested in taking up. Now, I know obviously Energy Saving Trust does a lot of this training itself. What can you say on that?
Sure. So I'm not going to recommend one particular provider because we are independent. But what I can say is that we have trained a large number of both independent driving instructors, so approved driving instructors, and some of those work for large fleet training companies as well. So it's over 1,000 individuals that we've managed to train. That's both in terms of the eco-driving in ICE vehicles, in petrol and diesel, but also more recently in the last couple of years on EVs as well. What I would suggest is that if you want to know who those providers are, to go onto our website. If you look at the business section under transport, you'll see a list there of driving instructors or driver training companies that we have trained and so approve in a sense because they've been through our training. So have a look on there and you'll get an idea of some of the players in the market that have been through our training.
Okay, so Richard, is there a role for telematics in route planning, in a sense, so enabling vehicles to plan ahead for the best driving modes and even to input into adjusting, monitoring the level of regenerative braking to maximise range?
Yeah, absolutely. So just to be clear, as Webfleet, we won't do input into cars or commercial vehicles. We take data from it, but there's implications with manufacturers and OEMs for us for putting data in. So we do take the data. We do measure how much coasting and regenerative braking has undertaken on any given journey or over a period of time. So yes, that coaching can then come through. And in terms of route planning, very much within our construct of the software platform is now, particularly in relevance to commercial vehicles, I guess, as you know, with the ranges that are currently in existence, is the ability to plan any recharging requirements through that journey planning. So where you've got service industries, for example, absolutely, those stops can be planned efficiently for lunch breaks or end of day admin sessions without being at the detriment of the number of drops that the vehicle would need to do in a day to be operationally efficient.
Okay,
so yeah, absolutely part of the development.
Okay, I mentioned regenerative braking. Tim, from your experiences with Energy Saving Trust, does regenerative braking have any impact on tyre and brake wear?
Well, we haven't tested that, but I think if you sort of think it through, then obviously if you're using the electric motor to slow the vehicle rather than the little pads that connect with the discs, then obviously there's going to be a saving. And so, regenerative braking definitely has that sort of double benefit of putting charge back into the battery. You're converting that sort of momentum energy, that energy of movement, back into electricity rather than effectively wasting it as heat through the brakes. So I haven't got any stats for you, but I think it's fairly safe to say that there's going to be definitely a saving in terms of both the brake wear and also the tyre wear. We all know that heavy braking is going to affect how quickly your tyres wear out. So, from our point of view, regen is a no-brainer. Just get on and do it, use it, set it to the highest level, and make the best use of it you possibly can.
Is there any data from a Webfleet point of view in terms of the benefits that the regenerative braking has on tyre and brake wear, Richard?
We've not got that yet, if I'm honest, Stephen. No, that's it's a little bit, but again, it's data that we're trying to pull as our own EV fleet grows. In terms of the European-wide volume that we've got. It's very much in the roadmap because we do produce maintenance data, so it's something we want to be grabbing. But just picking up on what Tim was saying as well in terms of regen, I would also say that part of the education is there are different levels of regen. And if you're on a motorway, switching into a lower regen mode actually may be more beneficial to range than in the urban areas where you want it at the maximum. And as I said in the presentation as well, there is also a driver safety aspect that some of the strongest regen modes can actually feel quite uncomfortable and nerve-wracking when they kick in. So having an understanding of that driver impact, and maybe there's a bit of balance to be had, is also something fleets should be considering as they bring these vehicles on.
Okay, so Tim, with some of the conversations you have with UK businesses, what are some of the challenges or common pitfalls that fleets need to address or overcome when it comes to adopting electric vehicles?
Well, I go to quite a few of these kind of events, roundtables, discussions about, what are the barriers to electric vehicles, and so I'm not going to kind of repeat all of the stuff that kind of goes before, because we kind of know all of that, and it's all ancient history. I genuinely think we're at a tipping point on cars. There's now a wide range of vehicles that are available to both fleet and consumers. I guess the biggest challenge, of course, is usually around charging. I maintain that most people will be able to charge at home or at the workplace, and sort of on the road charging is used in an emergency, and certainly the better the batteries get, the more that happens. But of course, if you can't charge at home, that's one of the biggest challenges that we're trying to address, and we're working with the Office for Zero Emission Vehicles on the on-street residential charge point scheme to really try and boost the numbers of charge points that are available to people who can't charge at home because they don't have a driveway. That's one of the biggest challenges, I think.
Okay, and Richard, in terms of use of data, what role can it play when a business is planning its EV strategy?
Well, I think just it's almost a follow on from what Tim's just said, actually, in terms of the charging. There's a lot of perceptions out there that maybe are overriding the reality of people's actual journeys. And I think the starting point is that you take the data, whether it's from Webfleet or another telematics provider, and you start to look at what the true trip journeys look like. And actually from there, we know that the average journey for a UK car is about 29 miles at the most for a business vehicle. So, in that sense, the level of charging infrastructure versus the actual number of times a vehicle will have to be charged during a week and everything, all of that, once understood through data, actually becomes a decision you can make that is managed, that is risk managed as well, and remove the perception and start dealing with the reality of the situation.
Okay, so final question that's come in is around, do you have a sample EV driving policy? So Tim, I don't know if Energy Saving Trust has anything, and then Richard, I'll just throw it over to you. So Tim first.
We haven't got anything published at the moment, but we have worked with a number of fleets to sort of implement kind of best practice around using an EVs. So it's something that we'll certainly look to produce and put onto a number of the toolkits that we've got available online.
Okay, Richard?
Very quickly, I'm aware of certainly nothing that we have easily to hand, but I know that Neil Chamberlain SSE has done a huge amount of work around driver policy and driver education on using an EV. So I'm more than happy to engage with him and see if he's and get some feedback into you to feed out Stephen, that if he's happy to be contacted and sharing anything he's done.
Okay, that would be great. I think we were discussing before we came on the panel around how the fleet community is sort of increasingly willing to share best practice, from safety to electric vehicles, which is something that we're more than happy to facilitate. So we will make those introductions in due course. So. All it leaves me to say is that we've come to the end of this session. I'd like to thank Tim and Richard for their excellent insights. We now go into a short 15 minutes networking break where you can chat with your peers via the attendees tab or join the sponsors in their networking rooms. The second set of breakout sessions will commence at 12:30 and you can join those sessions using the agenda and live streams tab. So thank you, Tim and Richard, and for everyone else, see you all later on.
Thank you, Steve.
Cheers, everyone.